Yes, we are live. Welcome, everybody, to another Duran Live. We have Alexander Mercouris in London, and we have with us the fantastic, the legend, Mr. Larry Johnson. Larry has an amazing blog where he does some of the best analysis not only on Russia and Ukraine, but also he paints a very good big picture view of what is happening in the world. The blog is sonar21.com. It is in the description box down below. That's where you will find the link to that blog. And when this live stream is over, I will actually put a pinned comment with that link to Larry's blog, sonar21.com. Larry, how are you doing today? It is a great honor to have you with us.
Well, I am honored to be with you guys. I'm a regular watcher, so I always enjoy getting enlightened. That way, I can act like I'm smart.
You're much smarter than I am, but
absolutely. I was just saying that's a very huge compliment, Larry. But all the same, I mean, if we can measure up to you, then that's something, I must say.
Well, I appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Larry. And let's jump right into it because we have Larry with us for about an hour 15, hour 20 minutes. So let's get into the live stream right away. Just let me do a quick hello to everyone that's watching on Rumble, on Odyssey, on YouTube, and on our fantastic locals chat as well. And to all our moderators, thank you very, very much for all the help. I see Lady Cosmica is in the house with us, and I think I saw Alan Watson somewhere in here, and I think I also saw Zariel as well moderating. I'm not sure, but thank you very, very much to our moderators. Alexander, I hand it off to you, and once again, sonar21.com. That is where you will find all of Mr. Johnson's work. Alexander, to you.
Absolutely. And can I just say, definitely you should go to Larry Johnson's blog at Sonar21, because of course there you actually see discussion about the war, and we're primarily going to talk about the war in Ukraine, but I hope we do touch on other subjects because, as Alex said, Larry covers many things. And by the way, he was exceptionally outstanding on Russiagate, that nightmare thing that we all know about. Anyway, but we're going to primarily talk about the war, and of course, as we always say on our programs, neither Alex nor I have any, intelligence or military type of background. Larry does. He's been there on the front line. He was an intelligence officer. He worked for the CIA, I think, and the State Department, and he's done all that. So he also understands the machine, the way it works from the inside, the way things are done. Also, of course, the way things are assessed and they're analyzed. And that gives a particular perspective to his discussion of the war. Because I have to say, whenever I read his pieces, I see them as pieces. I can feel that they're pieces written by somebody who has a professional training in understanding and explaining and analyzing these events. So that's really what I think makes them absolutely remarkable and distinctive. And Larry comes to this with a particular perspective and a particular voice. Can I just say, for example, a very interesting piece that's just gone up on his blog, explaining, the nature of special forces and what the different things about special forces were. I had absolutely no idea of anything. I learned a huge amount there, and also explaining why expecting special forces from the US to go to Ukraine and transform the situation there single-handed is simply unrealistic. So Larry has been seeing the situation in the war. He sees the trajectory of travel. He's been able to assess right from the beginning that, it was going to turn in the way that we now see increasingly turning out. We've now just had this battle at Lysychansk. There's a sense of shock. I think certainly in Britain there is. You can piece this together from some of the articles that have been appearing in the media here, because of course people in the British media at least have been taking their ideas from the British Ministry of Defence, which I understand gets its ideas from the Poles, who get them from the Ukrainians. So we get that sort of very strange perspective about the war. There was widespread anticipation that the Battle of Lysychansk was going to be a long, grueling, heroic battle. The Financial Times has an article today admitting that the expectation was that the Battle of Lysychansk would be a long one, and surprised that it wasn't. And of course, the Daily Telegraph, Mr. Oliphant, one of their most prominent journalists and people who just don't understand much about anything, at least, he has now he can barely conceal his dismay, and he says that Zelensky and Biden and Ukraine and everybody only has until the end of August to turn the war in Ukraine round. And he made that admission, first time I've seen it admitted to, especially in the Daily Telegraph, that in every battle of attrition that's been fought up to this moment, Ukraine has lost. So that's quite a breakthrough, and it gives you some sense of the dismay. Of course, it all comes along with all kinds of claims about how Severodonetsk and Lysychansk aren't strategically important. I'm not even sure what that word means anymore, to be honest, what strategically important means. But, Larry might be able to assist us understanding this concept, because I don't really understand it. It seems to change all the time. But one way or the other, it's clear to me, at least, that Ukraine is now losing. Larry has been saying that it would be losing all along, and he's been proved completely right. And about Lysychansk, I was going to ask Larry, first of all, what do you think, from the background that you have as a person who's worked in all these departments in the US government, what do you think the US government has known? Because this is, for me, the great mystery, the real puzzle. Did they believe the propaganda that was pouring out of Kiev, or do they actually have real people on the ground telling them this isn't working in the way that you think it is?
Yeah, that's the thing that people need to understand. I think Hollywood has done a good but terrible job of propagandizing the world about what the abilities of the U.S. government and its knowledge, and it's as if there is some centralized knowledge, and people, and only the best and the brightest rise to the top. They have this the all-seeing eye. It's like the eye from Lord of the Rings. It sees all, knows all. Boy, that's not the case. And I've always drawn the parallel with the CIA. People get into the CIA thinking they're going to be doing James Bond, Pierce Brosnan, Sean Connery. It's Dilbert. It is this pudgy bureaucrat that gets caught up with the mundane. So I still have friends in the community, and we converse from time to time. They're always careful not to divulge classified information, but they also can give me a sense of some of the atmospherics. And if early on in this conflict, the United States military at the very top, they were relying upon Ukraine to tell them what was going on. As far as, yes, we killed 10,000 Russians today. Okay, they'd write that down, and next thing you know, that's what they'd be reporting through intelligence channels. I mean, it's shocking when the Russians hit the base Yavoriv, which is in western Ukraine, which was a de facto NATO base, with that hypersonic missile. It set off alarm bells, panic throughout the Joint Staff, the top echelon of the U.S. military. They had no idea. They'd always, it was a theoretical concept to them, and at that time they saw exactly how it operates. So, coming back to Lysychansk, I think there was really the expectation that because it occupied a high ground, they were coming. They had to cross a river, so there were a lot of geographic features that made defending Lysychansk seem more easy to do than Severodonetsk. And yet, in a very short period, the Russians swept it, and the troops were fleeing to the west. So I think honestly, the U.S. intelligence community has been so politicized that there is not a good grasp or someone articulating what's really going on. I'm sure they have the information available. I know that I would be doing a lot better job if I had access to the signals intelligence, so we'd know what the order of battle was. When we say order of battle, how many soldiers are running around, how many vehicles, how many tanks, where are they located, what's their strength, what are the lines of communication, how do they get resupplied, how do you bring gas up to the front, how do you get food, are they eating, are they not eating? So there are lots of nuances you can read into once you get into that level of detail. The problem within the intelligence community right now, both on the military side, Defense Intelligence Agency, and the civilian side, especially CIA, is that if you present information that does not fit with the political narrative you've seen as, quote, rocking the boat, nobody wants to rock the boat. They want to get promoted. So therefore, you keep silent. And I mean, I experienced this firsthand back in 1986 when I was the Honduran analyst. I was the only Honduran analyst during the Contra Wars in Central America. And I remember when we would write pieces based upon what was actually going on the ground, we were told, boy, they're not going to like that down at the White House. Well, I didn't view my job as trying to become popular with the White House. My job was to tell them what was going on. And what we have right now is a completely dysfunctional intelligence community in this country, and that's dangerous.
Mm. Just to take up on one very specific point you made, and it's a real puzzle to me, is that the British Defence Ministry publishes every so often bulletins about the war. And if you follow them, if you track them, you would get the impression that the British don't really know who is the senior commander of the Russian forces in Donbass. Now, at one point, they said it was a man called Dvornikov. Then, he's been shuffled away. Then they said it was this new general called Surovikin. When you actually read what Putin was saying yesterday to the defense minister, Shoigu, it seems to me that Surovikin is clearly referred to there as a field commander alongside other field commanders. In other words, he doesn't seem to be in charge. Now, is it really credible? I mean, that Western intelligence doesn't understand what the military hierarchy in Donbass, the Russian military hierarchy is. I mean, I just can't believe that. So why is the MOD in London telling us these things which just don't make sense? What purpose is served by doing it?
I think part of it is just to persuade the British public and the American public that the Russians are inept, unorganized, unprofessional, and therefore they stand no chance. Part of it, I think, is it's a psychological operation. It's called in the intelligence community, it's called covert action. But you're absolutely right. They're with the signals intelligence. So GCHQ, which is the British version of the American National Security Agency, collects all sorts of intelligence signals, intelligence, communications, emails, phone conversations. They're going to know at some point what the structure of this military is. I mean, they have people dedicated to that. That's their only job, just to keep track of who's in what position where. So it's really a disservice. I saw something that came out of Britain the other day. They showed the picture of this general who looked like Jabba the Hutt. He was a Russian. They were claiming that he was the top Russian general, and good Lord, he looked sort of like Mark Milley in terms of being so physically out of shape. But it was, again, that was the psychological operation where you try to plant information to shape. They're really more concerned about shaping public opinion than they are in actually accomplishing, putting together solid information and informing the public about what's going on.
isn't that incredibly dangerous in a situation like this? Because ultimately, this is a war, and a war tends to end up with one side winning against another. And of course, if the British public, and of course in the United States, the American public, are being fed information essentially by their own, you know, media, and through the media, the bureaucracies that make up the governmental structures in these countries, we're being fed information that is completely wrong, that is giving us a completely false idea of what is happening. And I think there are many people in Britain who still believe that Ukraine is winning. Then what happens when Ukraine loses? How do you explain it? We're going to have a major crisis of credibility at some point. And of course, it isn't just going to be a crisis of credibility, because in the meantime, we are making all kinds of extraordinary decisions in Britain and in Europe, and even more in the United States, which people are accepting because they're being fed this completely incorrect narrative about what's happening. And of course, if they knew what was really happening, they might not be supporting those decisions. And one particular one, I'm just going to mention it briefly. I was watching the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who's just given a press conference. He's just given a speech after he's had several meetings in Berlin over a rapidly deteriorating situation in Germany. And I mean, he was clearly talking as the leader of a country in crisis. I mean, the language he was using was of Germany facing a crisis. But of course, the German people might be responding to that crisis in a different way, because he was calling on them to rally round and support, if they knew that this crisis was connected to a war where the side that Germany is backing is losing, which is not what they're being told at all.
Yeah, I mean, so the covert action part, let me just give you some context. So I joined the CIA in September of '85. I was in what was called the Career Trainee Program. And that program was designed to bring in a select group of new CIA hires and give them a complete overview of everything about what the agency did. And as part of that, we were given internships, 8-week internships, where we went to different parts of the organization. In my case, I was put into the Afghan task force. This was the Directorate of Operations entity that was running the covert action in Afghanistan when the Soviets were there. And the unit I was working with, our job was to create videotapes and plant magazine stories and create a narrative. And my one contribution then was we had T-shirts printed up that were passed out on the beaches of Montevideo, the beaches out east, and Punta del Este. And it showed all these forlorn, children and refugees, women, and it was a very distraught. And it said, these children can't go home for Christmas. Now, apart from the fact that they're Muslim and they didn't celebrate Christmas, the point was we're putting that message out there. And there are newspaper articles being planted with one, Jean-Jacques Servan-Schreiber is an example. He hated the CIA, was convinced the CIA was behind everything. And yeah, we were putting stories in his magazine that he didn't realize were from us. So there is that narrative, but you reach a point that you can't keep putting lipstick on the pig and telling them it's Marilyn Monroe, because the reality emerges. And that's the thing that's been frustrating me from the outset on this, that they keep saying, oh, the Ukrainians are doing this and the Ukrainians are doing that. And in this era of social media, where's the evidence? Because you can find ample evidence on social media on the Ukraine side of the bodies being buried that are, the horrific casualties going back. You don't see that on the Russian side. Now, they try to say, well, that's because Russia's a totalitarian society. And as I increasingly try to remind, at least Americans on my side of the pond, we got more political prisoners than Russia. So spare me that sanctimonious bullshit. about America the free and Russia the land of the authoritarian dictatorship. We've flip-flopped. It's almost the exact opposite. So what we face now is we have not seen since the start of the conflict on the 24th of February, we've not seen an armored unit of Ukrainian forces backed with infantry moving towards a particular objective, and Russian troops running with their hands in the air the opposite direction. Haven't seen it.
No.
Now,
No.
that to me is the tell that, all that Ukraine's got at this point is to hunker down in their foxholes, and they've got artillery and they're lobbing that, they're shooting some missiles, but they've yet to organize an offensive. And I know you said it yourself that you keep hearing them say that there's going to be a counteroffensive, and if you had a dollar for every time that they've said that, you would be a wealthy man. But we're not seeing that. So it's unfortunate that our military intelligence and our civilian intelligence have become so compromised that they're not able to sit down and actually tell a cold, hard truth that Russia, in spite of going in with 200,000, maybe 250,000 troops against 600,000, that is just the reverse of even conventional military strategy, which says that if you're an offensive force attacking the defensive force, you want at least a 3-to-1 advantage, 3-to-1. And in this case, the Russians, they go with a 1-to-3 advantage. I mean, it's remarkable. When the history of this is written, what Russia has accomplished over these last 4 months, I think is going to, it will be something that future war schools will teach, because nobody in history has done this.
We've just had a question, which I am going to pass to you. By the way, we had lots of questions. There was one from one of our regulars, Jennifer Chang, who also talked about your article, The Sovietization of America, which I also thought was wonderful, and she did too. But this question, did you hear that the US Embassy in Moscow uses number coordinates on their website instead of the newly changed address? I wonder why. I mean, why do something like this? I mean, presumably everybody knows where the US Embassy is.
Yeah, no, it's just they don't want to have to accede to the new name that Russia has bestowed upon the street in front that connected to the Donetsk. It is, that really sort of raises a point about when you look at what's going on now, and conventionally, one of the ways the United States intelligence community worked through human intelligence was to put case officers, those are the folks who go overseas to recruit other people to spy for us, to put them under diplomatic cover in embassies. During the darkest days of the Cold War, we never had the kind of animosity that we have right now. And in effect, the United States has deliberately blinded itself, because I don't see any way that any officer of the embassy could be meeting with any Russian of any kind and not immediately fall under suspicion. So we've created our own obstacles or barriers to getting that kind of intelligence. The United States also uses non-official cover officers, as does Russia does the same. But the ability of U.S. human intelligence, because what you want to know is, what are the Russians really thinking? Now, we do have the advantage. Putin's not, he's not some dark character that hides what he's doing. He's been very upfront. I mean, he's been really sort of unusual in that regard, because he tells people, yeah, we're going into Ukraine, we're going to demilitarize it, and we're going to denazify it. And those terms were not just modern creations, because that goes back to the Potsdam Conference at the end of World War II, where the US, UK, with the then Soviet Union, were talking about how to demilitarize, denazify Germany. Well, we're back to the future, so to speak.
Absolutely, and that was another, by the way, very very good piece that you wrote about this. The importance of this word, these words, demilitarization and denazification, that they actually have their origin at the end of the Second World War in the post-war conferences, especially Potsdam. And I didn't know that. And once upon a time, I was supposed to be a historian of that period. So there we go. So, but that is very interesting. By the way, on this topic, and we're always getting comments about how far will Russia go? We've actually had a rather interesting comment today from a Russian official from the Russian parliament, a man called Volodin. And he has actually said that we will go beyond Donbass because Ukraine is lobbying missiles at our cities. Yeah. And of course, we've got to go beyond Donbass in order to secure the peaceful life of those cities. Now, as far as I know, that's the first admission from somebody within the Russian power structure that they're intending to go beyond this special operation is going to go beyond and going to continue until all of Russia is out of reach of missiles. But of course, what does Russia mean in this context? Because if you include Kherson region in Russia and other regions in Russia, then of course Ukraine can continue lobbying those places. So you can continue advancing. Have you any thoughts about this, Larry? Where do you think the Russians? How far do you think the Russians will go?
Yeah, no, I think they're going to ultimately go up to the Dnieper River and secure everything that is to the east of the Dnieper, up and down, north and south. And I know, you two were talking a couple of months ago that Russia was going to go across the north of Odessa and into Moldova, to Transnistria, secure that. And I think that's absolutely right as well. Russia, this is, I think this has been really eye-opening for the Russian, not just Putin, but for the Russian people in general. They may have believed that they could actually be friends with the West. That it's just we're just having some misunderstandings. We just need to correct the language, and we can get along. No, I think they realize now these folks are crazy. The United States is absolutely insane. We're not governed by anybody that has any adult characteristics. It's a group of juveniles. So therefore, they have got to secure parts. They've got to really create a buffer zone for themselves, because Russia's not keen on trying to go into a nuclear war. They will if they have to. And the thing the United States doesn't appreciate, and I'm not saying this in order to advocate for the position, but the reality is, with the air defense systems that Russia has in place, with the S-500 and with the others coming, the S-550 that will be online, Russia actually has the wherewithal that it could fire a nuclear strike on the West. And the West, if they tried to retaliate, most of their missiles would not get through. Russia would be left standing. Now, I'm not saying that that would be horrific. It would be unthinkable. But it's one of those calculations that if you're a Russian military planner, you got to have it in the back of your mind. I think Russia is going to seize that territory, and they're basically going to turn Ukraine into a worthless island, because it's not going to have access to the Black Sea through Odessa unless it goes through Russia. And then it's going to either have to make up with Russia and speak nice, except this descent into this Nazi madness that has taken on in Ukraine. I was in Ukraine back in 1994. I was accompanying a female CIA contractor. I was her bodyguard. My job was to protect her from, we called him Viech the Lech. At that time, the Ukrainians were just, they were cannibalizing everything. We actually walked into an old, it looked like the U.S. State Department building in Washington, D.C., except you walk into the entryway and it had a single incandescent light bulb hanging from the ceiling. You could smell the toilets. And then as we walked down the hallway, we were there ostensibly to see a pizza oven. And as you walk down the hallway, there are these metal grates about every 20, 25 feet. And as you got to the end of the hallway, you could smell the heat coming off of metal. And we walked in, and here was this room, and there were radioactive glove boxes around. It was like a plastic box that you could put your arms into. You see them in the neonatal intensive cares where they're handling babies. And then there was this pizza oven. And so I looked around and I, asked the translator, I said, "Oh, what did they make here? What was this?" This is where they made SS-21 warheads at the time. And what they had done was they had actually cannibalized some of the equipment and had created this. Looked like a functional pizza oven, but none of the components were completely out of proportion. You had a huge box for electrical, and in it just a little device that was actually controlling. So Ukraine has gone through this devastation, and yet was rebuilding itself, but it was being, my view, I call it being raped by the West. The amount of money and Westerners going in there to get wealthy and get wealthy at the expense of the Ukrainian people, that should be what is outraging everybody. And frankly, that's why they're so pissed off at Putin, because he's put an end to that gold rush that the West was counting on. We can go in there, we can get wealthy, and we basically screw the local people. I don't mean to be so crude in this, but what is going on is crude, and it's obscene. And this is, the American people have been largely insulated from it, and they're lied to about it. So they still think Vladimir Putin is a communist, and it's like, okay, you can't fix stupid.
No, absolutely. I have to say, I completely agree, by the way, that this has been a gold mine for some people, Ukraine, and then previously Russia. And there is a huge amount of anger that this gold mine is being, shut down, and we won't have any access to it. I'm also going to make my own observation, by the way, that one of the reasons why this militant ideology sort of gained hold in Ukraine is because a lot of Ukrainian nationalists at the time the Soviet Union broke up, this is my memory of it, were very, very optimistic. They expected that Ukraine, with its industries, its factories, its laboratories, its rich soil, would prosper and prosper massively.
Yeah.
And it was when that didn't happen, when it turned into this kind of thing that you've just described, that made them very, very angry. And of course, that gave enormous impetus to this, to people who thought in that way. There was always a residue of people left over who already did think like that, but it made them much stronger because they were able to feed off the resentments and the angers that created. So I think that's partly the background. Now, what happens next? What are we going to do? Is the United States going to continue supplying weapons to Ukraine? I mean, this is becoming now a constant thing that people are saying. And we've just had another arms deliveries. The president has just signed off on hundreds of millions of dollars of more weapons. Are they going to go on doing this?
Right.
Or is there somebody going to come along finally and say this is going far enough? The world economy is not doing well as a result of this. We've got all kinds of problems, and our geopolitical position is weakening. Is somebody going to say that? Is that person going to get through? Is the president and the team around him, are they going to listen?
I don't know if they'll listen, but they're going to run up against let's call it the laws of physics. Mm. You can keep sending weapons to Ukraine, but who's going to use them? It's like in a copy of War Peace in Arabic to a Brazilian tribesman out in the jungle who can't read. Yeah, okay, he's got a book. Maybe he can build a fire with it. The problem is that the losses that the military is suffering in Ukraine are significant, and it's their best people. It's not the worst ones on the totem pole. And this kind of the training that's required to learn how to use these weapon systems effectively, and that doesn't mean just knowing how to turn them on and how to fire a missile. It means how do you also use them as part of an organized military strategy? Put them so that they operate with a unit, know how to move and know how to get from point A to point B. That's not, you don't do that in a week. One of the things that happened when I went into the CIA in '85 as part of the training program, they put us through a 12-week paramilitary course. The reason at the time was you had more people coming into the CIA that did not have military experience. They wanted to expose people to what it was like to be trained. We basically went through what would be called basic training and advanced infantry training in that 12-week period. And a whole variety of skills have to be acquired. And remember, the people in my class, in theory, were supposedly pretty smart. They had, tested high on conventional exams, but a lot of them had trouble learning and incorporating, just if nothing else, simply how to properly load and unload a rifle. So when you're looking at what's, the West can keep sending weapons, we could send them nuclear weapons. What are they going to do with it? You've got to have a way to launch it. You got to have a way to use it. And that's the problem. This expensive equipment's getting out there and it's getting destroyed. But then you've got the problem that has come, in the West and the United States and in Europe with the economic decline. Because I think it's starting to accelerate. I mean, we're seeing signs of it here, even in Florida. Florida's had a red hot real estate market, in part because people are fleeing the blue states, the Democrat controlled states, coming down here. In the past, literally like 5 weeks ago, if you were going to put a house on the market, before you could even put a sign out front, it was sold and you had competing bids. Now, those houses are staying on the market for 2-3 weeks, sometimes longer. There's no bidding wars. So we're starting to see that cool. That's here in Florida where people want to come. The continued impact of the high fuel prices, the shortages in the supply chain, they go beyond baby formula, beyond computer chips that aren't getting into cars, the expenses that are going into the agriculture, where friends of mine in the Midwest who have farms, where they're paying double, triple the price for diesel, 4 to 5 times the price for fertilizer. Those costs are going to get impacted, and we're going to see the continued rise of inflation. At some point, the American people will say, "This is enough. Why are we sending money to the Ukraine, who's basically getting its butt kicked, and why aren't we keeping that money here?" So I think that domestic political pressure is going to intensify and make it more difficult for the United States to sustain. Plus, Ukraine's losing, and it's becoming obvious. And, Americans don't like losers. They're not going to back the team that's, 0-14. And unfortunately, Ukraine's 0-14 in this regard.
Absolutely. And, I come back to that article in the Daily Telegraph, which said that they've got until the end of August to turn this round. I cannot, for the life of me, see how that is possible. And also, it for the first time, an article in the British media that I've read made the point that you're making about the fact that Ukraine is losing its best troops and will have difficulty absorbing and using effectively any weapons that's sent to it. It's a very strange article, very angry. The person who wrote it, as I said, this journalist called Oliphant, strong supporter of Ukraine. You sense that with him, Lysychansk has been a great moment of revelation in some ways. So, but you're probably going to see more and more people like that, and people saying, that if Ukraine is losing, what are we making all these sacrifices for at the end of the day? And that brings me to a question. We had a number of questions about Germany. One from, I think, our friend, Angry Warhawk, who does a wonderful program of his own. But he asks whether you think that Germany can ever break its connection to the US. I'm going to answer that question myself first, but after which we hear what Larry has to say. I don't think Germany has the capacity at the moment to make that break. I think the German political leadership simply lacks the understanding and the self-confidence. If you know Germany well, then what you will find is provincial politicians, because that's what they largely are, without the real sense of confidence and knowledge of the world that you would need to have in order to make that kind of break that that question was asking, but that the situation in Germany is getting very grim is absolutely the case. We're now getting reports that they're finally talking to the Canadians about getting this equipment to restart Nord Stream 1. There's talk about whole sectors of the German economy now having to close down, that there's going to be rationing in Germany. And of course, we've also had that speech by Olaf Scholz, which, as I said, was a speech of a chancellor who knows that he's now leading a country in crisis. But, what are your thoughts about Germany? Because it is obviously the pivotal country in Europe.
Yeah. I've actually spent out of every country in the world, I've spent more time in Germany after the United States, because I did a lot of training with the U.S. military special operations forces. So it's a lot of time in Stuttgart, at Patch Barracks and Kelly Barracks. Those are the two. One's the headquarters for United States European Command, the other U.S. Africa Command. And I think one of the keys in this, in the past, there was an economic benefit for Germany in that relationship with the United States. And what's happening now, particularly with this incredibly insane notion that we're going to basically disconnect the US dollar from the international financial market and eliminate the dominance of the dollar. I think right there, that is actually will be one of the factors that ends up leading to an estrangement ultimately between Germany and the United States. At some point, German self-interest is going to kick in, and the realization that Russia is a genuine, it is the number one, in my estimation, the number one industrial power in the world. The reason I say that is it's really the only country, maybe outside of China, that has the ability to produce most of what it needs internally to the country without having to be dependent upon others. Germany is certainly not in that position. I mean, they have good engineers, but ultimately they are dependent on fuel from outside and other resources and key minerals and materials in order just to produce their automobiles. So I think the financial dimension of this is what's going to cause the unraveling, not the military side. The military side ends up being a sideshow, and unfortunately, it's a cruel sideshow, because the Ukrainians that are paying the price in their blood as they fight for NATO, and to no good end.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my opinion, what they're doing, this is my own opinion, by fighting, continuing to fight, they're not saving Ukraine, they're destroying Ukraine. I mean, this is the paradox that people don't understand. The more Ukraine goes on fighting, the more territory it loses, the more Ukrainians die, the more of its economy gets dismantled.
Sure.
And so I mean, it is imperative for Ukraine, if it is to survive at all, that it makes peace. And of course, the price of that peace is rising every day that it delays doing it. And I think that it's a point I want to make, actually, because of course, we get criticized sometimes for our position about the war. I'm sure Larry does as well. But the people who claim that they are standing by Ukraine in this thing are false friends, because they are tempting Ukraine along a path that is leading it to its own destruction. And realism, by contrast, being realistic about what Ukraine's position is, that is in fact being more supportive, if you like, of Ukraine than, as I said, filling it up with illusions that it can somehow win this war when it manifestly can't. Is it true, do you think, that it is the United States that is telling Zelensky and his people not to negotiate? Because, of course, at this moment in time, I was listening to Zelensky's responses to the Lysychansk defeat. He talks about, we'll capture it, we take it back, we're going to go on fighting until we've recovered all our lost territories. Is this what he thinks? Is that what Ukrainians think? Is he responding to Ukrainian feelings, or is it Washington that's telling him to think that, like just to talk like that?
Yeah, no, I think you're right that it's the West, it's the United States, and it's Britain. You know, it's largely unexplored. It's accepted by many, but the role that the United States and the UK played in the first part in the Maidan back in 2014 in ousting the president and then installing a new, basically a new puppet and unleashing this whole madness. I mean, the war in the Donbass came out of that, and that was an intelligence operation. That was not some simple organic uprising of the people. And I don't, you can tell that the people of Ukraine are not really keen on this. You get the social media posts of Ukrainian military folks press ganging folks in the they're going out having to catch them, they're running away, they're trying to corral them. They're not lining up along the creating queues to say, I can't wait to get in and to enlist because I want to fight for the homeland. That's not going on. So, and again, those are one of the signs that you look for. It's not like what you see on social media in Russia, where troops are being sent home to rest, refit, and they're being cycled in and out of the front lines. They're being welcomed, flowers, parades. People are happy. You're not seeing folks set themselves on fire in Russia to protest the war because it's going so badly for them. And so what you see in Ukraine is this, this is this obscene pressure from the West. And, a lot of, we didn't appreciate until this operation started how many biolabs the West had put in there. I mean, I've been always puzzled. People focus upon Hunter Biden's role with the gas company. Nobody's hardly paid attention to Cofer Black, career CIA officer, and then he served in my old office at State as an ambassador at large for counterterrorism. That he's sitting on the board of Burisma. I mean, what's that all about? He's not a gas specialist, and why does a Ukrainian company need to reach out to a CIA officer and then pay him $80,000 a month or whatever to come on board? So, I think what you're seeing is this is deliberate pressure from the West. We've got a gun to their head. If you don't do what we say, you're not going to get any more financial support. And Ukraine absolutely needs that money coming in from the West because their economy is a shambles right now.
Indeed. In fact, can I just say, I was just reading a Russian commentator, and this is something to say about a couple of days ago, in which he made exactly the point you just made, that in fact, the most important thing for Ukraine is not the weapons, it's the money. If the money was stopped, the money flow to Ukraine were to stop, the whole thing would collapse like a house of cards. And that, in a sense, is what is prolonging the war more, because the weapons are obviously a problem for the Russians, but they can deal with it. But the money that's going in is keeping the Ukrainian state functioning after a fashion. Can I just say, I was born in the 1960s. My memory stretches back to the events of the late 60s and early 70s. I have to say that there are similarities for me between Ukraine and South Vietnam. Now, do you not find the same?
Yeah. No, we're creating sort of the same mess we did in South Vietnam. At least this time, we're not sacrificing 50,000 American troops. We're just killing the locals. We're letting them die for it. But you're absolutely right. This where we try to control what's happening in Ukraine by manipulating the political leadership. The fact that the CIA is there and is working with the SBU and trying to influence the process, the United States learned no less. Everything we tried in South Vietnam to exercise control or direction of that process failed. It was a failure. We lost. And instead of coming to grips with that, we decided to do it again, only this time the difference is instead of deploying U.S. troops, to go out and kill Ukrainians in the field. We're letting the Ukrainians do it, and we're fueling a civil war, and where there's again the lack of strategic vision in this. This reminds me a little bit of high school, where the mean girls got together and said, "Okay, well, we're not going to talk to Vladimir Putin anymore." But, hey, Russia's not going anywhere. Russia's going to be a part of this world, and it holds a lot of cards from the standpoint of its economic strength. So even during the bad days of the Cold War, there was still some dialogue and discussion with the then Soviets, and we're not having that now, which is doubly dangerous. And it is the only thing I can attribute it to is we've just got a bunch of juveniles running the top leadership positions. I mean, you look at Jake Sullivan, look at Anthony Blinken. Good God. I mean, they have zero qualifications other than they were politically well connected or born into the right families. That's it. But they have zero judgment, zero understanding of history. And unfortunately, I think American people are going to pay a terrible price as we go along, at least on the economic front. And I fear, it could escalate militarily. The U.S. is going to decide, we're going to show those Russians. And what they're going to find out, the United States hasn't fought a peer-to-peer foe since the end of World War II. We're going to get a rather rude wake-up call if it comes to that.
Do you think there's any real danger of U.S. troops being committed to Ukraine?
Not now. They made a big deal about, we're deploying the 101st Airborne to Poland, and 101st Airborne, they don't carry heavy weapons. What are they going to do? They're going to be basically a speed bump for the Russians to roll over. They can good to go in and seize a particular spot of ground and try to defend it until there can be air support and artillery and tanks can come to the rescue. So it's a really an empty symbolic gesture. But the problem with this is when you put people into those positions where they're close to the battle, something could happen, which would then escalate. Somebody gets killed, or there is a exchange of fire that was unintentional, and then they could escalate. But I don't think, if left to a rational choice, the Americans going to commit. That's why up to this point, they even backed away from trying to, quote, impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine. That'll work, because the Russians will be shooting our planes down right and left. They've avoided putting actually heavy tanks and other things in. So they're trying to keep up the pretense of support for Ukraine without actually doing anything that makes any difference whatsoever. And frankly, no matter what we do at this point, will it make a difference on the ground? Even if we put our own troops in, Russia's too well positioned and too well equipped.
What do you think about the fact that at the same time that we've got this crisis in Europe, I'm sorry, my dogs are yapping away, but
that's all right. I got two Rottweilers, so I know what it's like.
Can I just say, we're now talking about focusing, taking on the Chinese at the same time, because there's this extraordinary statement from NATO talking about the Russians and the Chinese being in effect allies, which, by the way, was an extraordinary. That's the first time, in my opinion, that they've, to my knowledge, that they've linked the Chinese and the Russians together so explicitly, and in effect said that these two countries are working together. They're in sort of a kind of de facto alliance with each other. But the thing I always ask myself is this. Do not people in the United States understand that enormously powerful that the US military is, it is finite? You can't be strong everywhere. I think it was Frederick the Great who once said, if you try to defend everything, you defend nothing. And that you have to choose what your priorities are. Now, I know there's many people in the United States who have very strong feelings about China. And by the way, I understand this better than I understand their feelings about Russia, if I may say so, because I don't really understand what the issue with Russia is. But that's for another day. But I understand this. But if you got yourself into a conflict with Russia in Europe, then why are you rearing to start a conflict with China, which is almost what some people are talking about? Pompeo is now talking about recognizing Taiwan, whilst you've still got this ongoing conflict with Russia going on. If you want to focus on China, shouldn't you be talking to the Russians to try and calm that down in some ways? Why are we taking on everybody? And I say we because we British
Right.
are also in on this ride. Why are we taking on everybody? Two great powers on simultaneously at the same time. Aren't the people in the Pentagon, in the intelligence community, in the economic agencies of the US government saying this is overextension? We can't do this. And if we try to do this, we risk losing everywhere.
Well, implicit in your question is this assumption that there is a level of strategic thinking present at the upper echelons of both the military and political leadership of the United States. And I would simply assert that that's a false assumption. There is no strategic vision. I know for a fact through conversations with people that were seeing the intelligence and what was going on, the current head of the Pacific Command, it's called PACOM, is the short version. PACOM's head has been undertaking deliberately provocative actions in and around Taiwan, as if to try to provoke the Chinese into doing something. And I know for a fact at least one general, which I can't name who it is, but they have been having to go around sort of like those people, the guys in the parade that follow the elephants that have to sweep up what the elephants leave behind. That's what this guy is doing to try to keep this individual from starting World War III with China. I mean, it's madness. And yet within this, you put your finger on it, and this is why Henry Kissinger said what he did at Davos, that we shouldn't be alienating the Russians and forcing them into the Chinese corner, because all of a sudden at that point, the United States is quite weak. Andrei Martyanov has done a magnificent job of really identifying the shortcomings in the U.S. military strategy. The American people believe that our military is so strong that we could fight a land war, and we got the control of the air, we got control of the sea. And Andre is exactly right in pointing out that these aircraft carrier groups, which is really the heart and soul of the U.S. ability to project force overseas, is completely vulnerable to the hypersonic missiles, which happen to be in the arsenals of China and Russia. So that means we can't even get those aircraft carriers near to those land masses, or else they will be destroyed and the aircraft on them will have no place to land. So all of a sudden, what we thought was one element of strength is now it's eliminated. It's a useless appendage. So there unfortunately is no strategy, no strategic thinking involved here. It's all very reactive. It's like I said, it's acting like an emotional teenager.
The trouble is that the other side is thinking strategically, and you don't have to guess about this. You looked at the statement that came out of the BRICS summit just a short while ago. You can see clearly that they're working out their strategies, and they're thinking things through, and they're coming up together. So, I mean, unless you have a plan to deal with their plan, you're going to lose. I mean, they always say that, in chess, in a chess game, the person who has the plan wins. I can say this is the same in law. If you're in a litigation situation, the lawyer who has the litigation strategy is going to win the court case almost invariably, even all other things being equal. I'm sure it's true of war, but it's also surely true of high policy, grand strategy also. And this is what's so strange to me, because the United States used to do grand strategy. I mean, it did it very well. I mean, it did it outstandingly well. That was how it won World War II. That's how it became, the world's most powerful country. What happened? Where was it lost?
Well, there's a phenomenon, and I witnessed it firsthand. So back in the early 2000s, I was helping teach a seminar through the U.S. State Department's Anti-Terrorism Assistance Training Program. It was called Senior Crisis Management, and it would bring the people from one country, the senior level police and civil servants, politicians, to the United States, and we do a crisis management seminar for them. And my job was to teach the terrorist threat and basically don't pull fingernails out and torture people. Those were my 2 lectures. And conversations, and we had people, 60 different countries, everybody from Sri Lanka, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Colombia, Cyprus, and Greece, all of them. And I found a common denominator among all of these people from different languages, different cultures, even different religions. Every single foreigner believed that the United States had a secret plan, and all this was around 2004. So they really believed that we had some secret plan with respect to why we've invaded Iraq, that there was some grand strategy, because they were thinking about it like chess, that the United States had 2, 3, 4, 5 moves ahead, that they thought about this. And I had to tell them, I said, guys, no, you think that this decision to invade Iraq was based upon some strategic vision? You're kidding yourselves. And they'd look at me like shocked. Surely you people can't be that stupid. I was like, yeah, actually we can. Please don't. It was, but that's when I first understood that because of what the United States became after World War II, there was the assumption that there was an actual, let's call it the hidden hand, moving behind the scenes that has some great strategy. And then, looking back, I think the United States got lucky. We did have some smart people early on, but the signs of the stupidity started early on. Look with the carrying out the coups in Guatemala and Iran in the 1950s, and then the policy towards Cuba. How's that worked out? Why the United States thinks imposing sanctions on a country is going to get us what we want when we've got a 60-year record with Cuba showing that it really doesn't work. So there's really little learning going on the part of U.S. authorities, and instead of building upon the previous generation and knowledge going up incrementally, I think we're seeing a decline. I mean, I've never been this frightened by what I see that's in the leadership positions in Washington right now, and it's not a partisan thing.
I entirely agree. I mean, I have to say, I remember Nixon and Kissinger. I didn't like them at the time. I don't think I like them now. But right. My goodness, they at least came across as a great deal more impressive than the kind of people we have around today.
Right.
Can I make a question? This is a question out of history, because I know you have a background that extends all the way back to the American Revolution in your family. Oh. I always said that the United States was not designed for this sort of thing. This is my own personal thing. I say this all the time, that if you read the American Constitution, if you read the way in which the Republic was created, it was never intended to be this kind of global empire's hegemon. This is alien to what the United States is about. And first of all, do you agree with that? And if so, do you think it's also perhaps one of the reasons? Because Americans are not stupid people. Americans are some of the cleverest people I've ever known. The level of intellectual ability in the United States is phenomenal. It's only in foreign policy that it seems to, fall apart. Is it because this isn't ultimately what America is designed to be? It's just doing something that is contrary to its, underlying DNA, if you like.
Well, you're far more generous and kind in your assessment of the intelligence of the American people. One of the things you see, if I just took you out of the house, go down my street, and we started interviewing people and say, what's the capital of Florida? Most would be struggling to identify Tallahassee. When you ask, who's your senator? Most don't know. So the level of knowledge among the American people, not only about current events but history. Uh, Jay Leno, who used to have a show on every night, a comedian. Jesse Waters, a guy that shows up on Fox News. They do these. They're famous for these man in the street interviews, and a guy named Mark Dice. They all go out. They ask people questions. The one that really caught my eye was Mark Dice was out in California, and he says, "Okay, who did we fight in World War II?" And people get the blank look. There was a war. Well, World War II, the one, they weren't sure there was a war, and second, they didn't know who was fighting whom. Now, you have to have a fundamental level of education and understanding of history in order to have something to hold together as a nation. And that's what's really, I think, lacking here in America, which is allowing us to get pushed into these wars, foreign wars of attrition, I call them. And yet, the thing that's driving it behind, I know I'll sound like a conspiracy theorist in this, but I see no other explanation for it, is the keeping the defense industry fed and growing is critical to the economy. And there was panic when the Soviet Union collapsed. They look, oh God, who's our enemy now? Oh, terrorism. Thank God terrorism showed up and we could devote money. But terrorism was really weak soup. And it didn't provide for all of these very expensive weapon systems. I mean, when you think of an aircraft carrier costs $13 billion, and an F-35, I'm always amused by that. Oh, let's give the Ukrainians or some of the other European allies F-35s. You're giving them something that every time you fly it, you got to spend $35,000 for every hour it flies. Does that sound like a good deal? So there is within the United States, it's increasing the level of ignorance. It's actually absolutely astonishing. They're not even sure who we fought in World War II or why. And part of that reason was, despite the way Hollywood portrays it as American having suffered great losses, America didn't suffer at all, particularly compared to what Russia did. And that's why Russia remembers today, because 13% of their population was killed in that conflict. You'd be hard pressed to find a family that didn't lose somebody, a father, brother, cousin, uncle, whoever. And, unfortunately, these horrific events in the past end up shaping what we can do in the future. And that's why I think we're on sort of a collision course, because the Russians sure as hell remember, and they're not forgetting. And the Americans are walking along clueless, like, what's with those Russians and their authoritarianism? And not even paying attention to what's going on here at home. I mean, we've never seen this level of political coercion by the FBI on people from the other party. I mean, it's the kind of stuff I grew up with seeing the Stasi do in East Germany and seeing the KGB do in the Soviet Union. But by God, I never thought I'd be seeing it here in America, and it's happening here.
I completely agree with the last point. I think we all do, by the way, here on the Duran. I have to say, it's the thing that has shocked me, and in some ways even frightened me the most, more than the Ukraine thing, that things like that could happen in the United States. And of course, if they happen in the United States, they happen in Britain as well. In fact, to a great extent, we influence the Americans, but we also take ideas back from the Americans. It's very, very disturbing and very, 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 very worrying. And by the way, I also agree with you about the fact that the military industrial thing plays a huge role in this, and it's not to be underestimated. And I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. I think that's a simple fact. It's an objective fact. It was identified as such by US presidents in the past. I don't think we should be embarrassed to talk about it, actually. Where do we go?
Well, let me just try. So when I lived in Bethesda, Maryland, my next door neighbor was the largest defense lobbyist in Washington, D.C. And so about a month or so ago, I sent him a note. I said, boy, I'm sure hoping Raytheon's not one of your clients. And he goes, why? Because they are. I said, well, geez, you guys are really doing a great job of arming the Russians and funding the black market. And he goes, what are you talking about? And so I shared with him the information about all of the weapon systems that Raytheon was making that were winding their way up in the Russian hands, and then also on the black market. He had no idea. He was not feigning ignorance for my benefit. He literally had no idea that was going on. That shows you, again, the level of disconnect here. That you would think that people who are on the cutting edge of defense lobbyists in Washington, D.C. would know exactly what's going on the ground in the Ukraine. Not at all.
Absolutely. Can I just also say on Russia, what you say is absolutely true. And from my experience about, the Russian memories of the war. And of course, not just because if you remember the war, as the people in Russia do, it also gives you a very, very deep historical knowledge generally. It's the most historically minded society on earth, more than any other, more than China, in my experience. I mean, I've had dealings with Chinese people. The Russians are profoundly informed in what they do by history. And it goes down very deep to every level of Russian society. And it is not to be underestimated.
Right.
So coming back to my question, where does this go? Where are we going? Have you any sense of where this is heading? I mean, I think we're all agreed that the war is going to end in the way way Mr. Putin wants it to end, however that is. But where do we find ourselves in the United States and in Europe? What is the end point here? I mean, that's a huge question, and obviously you can only provide a partial answer. But
I think number one, what we have witnessed since February 24th, and the reaction of the West to that, are changes as consequential to the world order, as what happened at the end of World War II. In other words, at the end of World War II, with the creation of Bretton Woods and setting up the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and the United Nations, you created a political, economic infrastructure for global order that was dominated by the United States. What has happened since February 24th is that's been blown up. Yeah, it still exists. The buildings are still there. People go to the meetings. The banks are still there. But the underlying infrastructure is now being reconstructed. And with Russia and China in the lead of that, I think BRICS is not just a passing fashion. BRICS is something that's substantive, that is going to be transformative. Maybe not in a way that the West will find beneficial, but it will be transformative. And within this, I think Vladimir Putin has correctly assessed, you're looking at a multipolar world. The United States' ability to call the shots are gone. This is that moment in The Wizard of Oz when they pull back the curtain, and instead of this all-powerful whiz, you find this little old guy who was sort of a fraudulent preacher selling snake oil behind the curtain. And the United States, the power of the United States is the myth will have been exploded. We're not quite as powerful as we've claimed we are, because number one, our aircraft carrier groups no longer can rule the seas because the hypersonic missiles take that threat away. The dollar, you want to do something, you got to come with your dollar to us. All of a sudden, you get the people now have alternatives. And cutting off SWIFT, incredibly stupid from the standpoint just from intelligence collection. With SWIFT, you could actually monitor every dollar transaction going on in the world. Now, the United States has blinded itself. So I think this restructuring and the reordering of the new world, it's going to take a while to shake out. But historically, this will be, I think, let's call it February 24th, 2022, will be seen as the end of that period that, marked with the surrender of Germany on May 8th, 1945 to February 24th, 2022. I think it is that profound a change.
Crumbs. Larry, I think we have had an absolutely astonishing program. And unless, well, first of all, perhaps I should invite you, if you want to have to say some more things. I mean,
Well,
I could probably go on debating this for hours and hours, but it wouldn't be fair. I think certainly not in our first program, but which I hope we will be the first of many. But perhaps if I can invite you to add any particular comments, and also invite Alex also if you have any particular questions, but Larry
well,
first, perhaps.
I'm delighted and honored to be with you guys. I really, I have been a big fan. Just it what your program does, and this is one of the, let's call it the rays of light that gives hope for the future. Even though corporate media has come to dominate and try to control what happens over regular airwaves, the fact that these outlets still exist on the internet, it's like water running downhill. It's going to find a way through. And this information that gets out there, people will search for it. They'll find it. And I think, that's one of the reasons I do what I do. And I'm sure it's one of the reasons why you guys do what you do. You want people to be informed because you believe fundamentally that people armed with knowledge can act in ways that will be for the benefit not only of themselves and their families in the world. And I think that's what we're about, trying to promote that kind of understanding so we stay away from this madness and can, get away from being comfortable with having just tens of thousands of people killed on a daily basis. It's just sickening.
All right. So I've got two quick questions, Larry, if you can answer them. Just take 5
Sure.
minutes and then we'll wrap it up. We've got a lot of questions. What we're going to do is we'll get all the questions together. We'll answer them in a dedicated video, and questions that are addressed towards you, Larry, we'll shoot them off to you in an email. And you can, if you want, maybe you want to create a post about them.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to answer them in another way. We'll also answer them as well. But my two quick questions, looking at the chat and looking at all the super chats and the locals feed and Rumble, Odyssey, are: what are your thoughts with regards to Poland and what's going on in Ukraine? What do you think the extent of Poland's involvement will be with Ukraine, if any? And what are your thoughts on what's going on in the Netherlands with the protests, the farmer protests? How do you think that fits into the picture of things?
Yeah. Well, first with Poland, it's a reminder why people need to understand history. But actually, it so puzzles me that the Poles will align themselves with Ukraine, because when you go back to World War II and you start with the murder of the Polish soldiers and political elites at Katyn Forest, and the sort of the wedge that drove between Poland and the Soviet Union at the time, then on top of it, the number of Ukrainians that were involved, the Bandera, Stefan Bandera side, that were killing Poles. I mean, 100,000 in this one particular fellow. So you would think that would naturally mean that there would be no alliance between them. And yet I think Poland hopes to recover some of the territory that it lost at the end of World War II, particularly getting back as far east as Lviv. So I mean, it's a very bizarre relationship. The animus that the Poles have expressed in this sort of seem a little out of proportion, given the historical roots. You think there'd be a little more trepidation on their part about getting into bed with the Ukrainians, particularly ones aligned with the Bandera movement. With reference to the Netherlands, hey, Jim Carville, back when Clinton was running for president, said it's the economy, stupid, and it's always the economy. The farmers, the people out there on the front lines, they know what it takes to actually to operate a farm. The food that shows up in the grocery stores is not magically packaged someplace else. It starts on the land, and the fuel prices and the price of fertilizer, those are critical components. I mean, I was hearing about this from I've got a good friend in Iowa, and he was telling me that 3 months ago. The farmers then were already suffering, and it hasn't gotten better. And so this kind of political pressure, I think, is only going to increase and spread. I don't see it diminishing.
Do you think it's on purpose, Larry, that they're hijacking Ukraine? When I mean they, This is the final question, then we'll wrap it up because
Yeah, yeah.
we don't want to hold you too long, and we've been known to go for many, many hours. But do you think that there are people like, say the Green parties, like the Brabaks and the Habecks and the Klaus Schwab's, WEFs, that are hijacking Ukraine in order to push a different agenda, their 2030 agenda or their green agenda, whatever it is? Do you see aspects of that?
No, I don't think they're that smart. I think really their time horizon is pretty short, and so they're driven more by the immediacy. And they will say things like they want to promote a green planet, and now they have created a policy where they're going to have to use coal and all the dirty fossil fuels that they claim that they want to get rid of. I mean, that's if this was a Monty Python comedy sketch, this would be hysterical if it didn't actually involve genuine human suffering. I mean, these people have literally set themselves on fire and are calling for the elimination of the fire department. It's like, really? So, we're just, I'm afraid the only way we're going to learn out of this is through enormous international suffering. And I don't think the countries that will be largely immune from it will be Russia. That is going to be the ultimate irony.
Yeah.
Well said. Do you have any other questions, Alexander?
No. I think I've gone through lots, and as I said, it's been absolutely wonderful debate, by the way. And I think we've all learned huge amounts from you, Larry.
Well, thank you so much.
About how especially how the US works, and of course, if you want to understand about Ukraine, as I said, do go to his to Larry's blog, and it's absolutely brilliant. Do you want to reference it again, Alex? Sonar21.
Sonar21.com. I put a link in the description box down below, and I will put a link when this stream is over. I will put it as a pinned comment as well. Sonar21.com. Larry does fantastic work.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And thank you very, very much, Larry, for joining us on this live stream. And please come back. It would be a pleasure to have you back again.
Anytime. I'm always honored. I appreciate your generosity and your kindness.
Thank you very much. Larry Johnson, thank you so much. Alexander Mercouris in London, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone that watched us on Odyssey, Rumble, on our locals chat, our fantastic locals chat, and on YouTube as well. And thank you to our moderators, Lady Cosmica, Reckless Abandon, Alan Watson in the house as well, and everyone else that was moderating. I think I got all our moderators. If I missed a moderator, I do apologize. But thank you very, very much to our moderators. Thank you for all the questions, the Super Chat questions, the Rumble, Odyssey questions. We will get all of those answered as well. Once again, sonar21.com, everybody. Have a fantastic day. Take care.
Ciao, guys.